Start off with multi-area OSPF version 3, that is our next topic. So in this we're going to configure IP addresses on 3 of the routers. Along with that we are going to configure IPv6 with an OSPF version 3. So I'll be creating a new project here. Okay, so we have that project, so I'll just create another one. And we're going to use 3 routers in this case with serial connections from router 2, 2 serial connections going from router 2, router 1 here, 2 and 3. Serial 0, alright. So we'll start off these devices. So our next step is to configure some loopbacks on router 1 and router 3. I'll enable this. Okay, these are the interfaces that will be shown here. So I'll switch this off here. Make sure that the interfaces are named correctly. And going ahead with our loopbacks. So what we are going to do here is we are going to configure loopback 0, okay, loopback 1, loopback 2 and loopback 3. So 4 loopbacks in total here, and there will be 4 here as well. So this will be named as loopback 4, this as 5, 6 and 7. Okay, that looks good. So now I'm going to start off with R1. So we need to enter the console mode, bring this here. So we'll configure the first interface, that is S0/0. So conf f conf t interface 0/0 shut down. Need to define IPv6. IPv6 address would be 2001:db8:ACAD:12:/64. No shut. Okay, so this is the IP address that we have configured for R1's S0/0 interface. Now we will do some loopbacks here. So for loopbacks, we'll configure the interface loopback, that is loopback 1, specifying the IP address. Okay, so it's IPv6 address being 2001:db8:1:1/64. No shut. Next loopback, slight changes to our IP address. So in this case it will be 2 here, no shut. Third loopback, no shut. This time IPv6 will be changed to 3. no shut and do write the configuration. So that was for R1. Now we'll go on with R2. Same, we're going to configure the interface S0. First get into config mode, interface S0, which is serial, no shut, IPv6 address being 2001:DB8:ACAD:12/64. No shut in this case. The other interface is S0/1, no shut, IPv6 being address 2001:DB8:ACAD, this being 23, which is the other interface IP address. We don't have any loopbacks here in this case, so we won't be doing any loopbacks in R2. No shut. Okay, now what are we seeing here is that we will need one loopback for R2 rather than having 4 in R1 and R3. So we'll call this loopback as we have 7 here, so we'll call this as 8. So L0, or you could say LO being 8 here. So this is our 8th loopback. So for that we'll do it inside R2's console. So L8 IPv6 address being DB8 ACAD, call it as 8, and we'll follow the same nomenclature, or you could say same series of what we have done for loopbacks, which was 1 to 7. So this would be 8 here, and then the subnet 64 is being no shut, and write the configurations. So now I'll just note this as text here, so we can get an idea what IP addresses are we using here. So in the case of R1, we have seen that R1 has an IP address that is 2001 colon which is DB8 colon ACAD 12//64. This is the IP address of this interface, and we have loopback addresses being following a series like from 0. So for the case of 0, we won't be having any number here, so we'll just keep this like that. And for the other rest loopbacks, we'll be adding :1 here. Okay, so that's how we have set for loopback 1, followed by other loopbacks, that is loopback 2, which is 2 here, and then 3. Okay, so this looks good. Now what we need is, we will specify that loopback 8 has an IP address 8 here, which is an IPv6. Okay, but we did configure for our interfaces, so that interfaces IP addresses actually are 12 and 23. So this will be 12, this being 23. Okay, let's see if we have not missed anything here. So yeah, this is after 12.1, so this will be 2, and here in this case this will be 23.2. So here this will be 23.1. Okay. So that's all for R2. Now let's go down to R3, which we have 4 loopbacks and an interface S0/1. So before I actually configure that, let's define the IP address. So we can keep this as 1 or just take the next, which is 3. So I'll just like to call this as 3. Okay, so this is the IP address of the interface S0/1. Okay. Next is for the loopback. So for loopbacks, we do have these series. So I'll just okay, just copy them. This will be 4, this being 5, 6 and 7. Now we are okay with configuring them in R3. So get to R3 console. So first thing first, we are going to configure R3's interface, that is S0/1. So for that, config terminal interface S0/1, no shut IPv6 address being 2001:db8 ACAD 23::23. Yeah, so we're doing for S0/1, so it's 3/64. No shut, and then we'll go ahead with our loopback configuration, which is L4. No shut, no shut, and IPv6 of loopback address 4, which will be 2001:db8:ACAD 4/64. Alright, so no shut. Next loopback is loopback 5. Okay, calling it no shut and just tweaking the IP address from 4 to 5 here. No shut. Next interface is L6. No shut. Calling in the IP address, changing it to 6, saving that. No shut. Interface 7, loopback 7, and there also no shut, and the IP address tweaked a little bit to 7. No shut. And next is write the configurations. So that's all with respect to configuring the interfaces with IPv6. Now the next step is once we have assigned all these IP addresses to our router, what we are going to do is we are going to have an IPv6 unicast. That is, we are going to have to assign a router an ID. So in this case, my next step would be configuring R1 and setting up unicast here. So I'll exit this, and in config mode I'll specify IPv6 unicast routing and write the configuration. Next step is we are going to set up an OSPF. So under config mode I'll do an IPv6 OSPF, and after that assigning a router ID that will be for router 1, and do show what is there in IPv6 OSPF. So I'll get the details in a form of a summary um, about the ID that I have set, which is a version 3 OSPF set to router 1. The same with router 2. Okay, so exit, and I go ahead with like I did in router 1, which was starting off with unicast. So IPv6 unicast dash routing, do write, build the configuration, specify IPv6 router OSPF 1, and giving a router ID to this router 2 as 2.2.2. Let's check what's there. So if we are in a config mode and you want to see a summary or do a show command, so in that case you need to do a do in front of it. So do sh, otherwise you have to exit and come down to your privilege mode and check your sh command working. So OSPF, which will show me the details, which looks good. Same, we're going to go ahead with R3, exit the interface mode. Okay, next is IPv6 unicast routing, do write. Similarly, IPv6 router being an OSPF 1 enabled and giving a router ID as 3.3.3. Do sh IPv6 OSPF, and this sets a router ID 3.3 on our router 3. Now we have configured all our multi-area OSPF version 3s in all our routers. Next is we're going to specify the point-to-point network connections between these routers R1, R2 and R3. We are going to use the interface of the loopbacks. So we're going to use L0, LO1, LO2 and LO3 in R1 to configure an OSPF network which will be point-to-point. So in that case, we will be entering the config mode. First I'll exit, I'll enter the loopback 0 mode, and I'll configure IPv6 being OSPF 1 inside area 1. This is what we are specifying. So we're going to put all of these loopbacks under one area, that will be area 1. Okay, so specifying IPv6 OSPF network point to point. Next interface is L1, which will specify being under area 1. Next, it will be same point to point. Next interface is L2, configuring it as OSPF1 area 1 being point to point. Then comes in L3 under the same OSPF area and also being point to point. Next step is the interface that we have here, S0/0. So I'm going to enter that mode, that interface, and also specify IPv6 OSPF 1 area being 0. So our loopbacks are another area compared to what we have in S0/0. Now to understand and visualize this more clearly, we're going to draw one circle here. This will make sense when we look at OSPF. So this is being area 0, area 1. I'll specify this as area 1, and this being as area 0. So two OSPF areas, these loopbacks are under one area, and this is another area, area 0. Now we're going to tell R2 about this whole situation that we are in, that you have an area 0 as a neighbor. So we'll get into R2, and I'm interested in getting into the config mode. Okay, in R2 we will set up the interface as 0/0, specifying it as IPv6 OSPF1. It is under area 0. Okay, so this makes sense because we are here, okay, with this neighbor which is under area 0. Next step is we are going to configure this interface that is also part of area 0. So these will be considered as area 0. So going ahead with R2's configuration of the next interface, that is S0/1 IPv6 OSPF1 area 0. There is a loopback, if you remember, it is loopback 8 that we have here. So I need to specify that interface also. So it will be L8, and also specifying that it is under area 0. IPv6 OSPF is a network point-to-point connection, and write the configurations on a router. Now, next interesting thing is that we are going to set up this part. As you can see here, loopback 4 to loopback 7 being in another area, that is area 2. Since we are doing multi-area and we are also incorporating version 3 of OSPF, so we need to take care of the implementation that our goal and objective, that is to create a multi-area system. So I'll be duplicating this block here and calling it as area 2. This will be area 2. Now let's see how we'll do that in R3. Now once we are in R3, we'll get into config mode, interface L4, which is our first loopback, specifying IPv6 OSPF1, and area I'll specify as 2. Also saying that it's point-to-point, so OSPF network being point-to-point. Interface loopback 5 is our next loopback, doing the same, getting it under the same area 2, saying it's point-to-point. Next is loopback 6, area 2, point-to-point. Loopback 7, area 2, also being point-to-point. Now these are the configuration of our loopbacks which is under area 2. The next step is the S0/1. Now we know that S0/1 is under area 0. Okay, we need to keep in mind that this is under 0. So calling up the interface first, so S0/1 being IPv6 OSPF1 area 0, and then specifying it in the configurations. So this is done. We are done with the configurations of our OSPF areas as well as configuring the IP addresses and the area specifications. Now the next step is we are going to use the show IPv6 protocol command to verify if our OSPFv3 shows us the result. So we'll go on R1, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the show command. So I'll just do an exit here, and exit, and show IPv6 protocols and see if we have things set up here. So we can see that there are some interfaces under area 1 that we have specified. Okay. Now area 0 does show us that it uses serial 0/0. We'll see what's in R2. Exit the config mode and sh IPv6 protocols. Okay, it shows us loopback 8 under area 0, that's correct, and the two interfaces 0/0 and 0/1. Makes sense. What protocols it is using? It's using OSPF. Let's look at R3. We should see all our 4 loopbacks here. So do sh IPv6 protocols. Sorry, it will be sh, not do sh. So yeah, we have 4, 5, 6, 7 and serial 0/0 being 1/ being in area 0. Okay, so that actually shows where our areas are located. In router 1, I can see that we are missing with L0 here. For some reason, we don't have our L0 being shown in the results. So I think we need to reconfigure that so it comes down under the same area. So what I'm going to do is I will be looking forward to reconfigure that part and probably just get that loopback also in our group of area 0. So config t, I'll bring back loopback 0, call it IPv6 OSPF1 area 1, says that no IPv6 is enabled on this interface. Okay, so getting this issue. After looking into some articles and doing some R&D, I think that we might need to enable our OSPF that is showing us this error as IPv6 is not enabled on this device. So we will get into our interface first. So interface is loopback and specify IPv6 enable. Okay, and then we could just simply try our commands and see if this works. So IPv6 OSPF, and now we can see that we are not getting that error anymore. Okay, and I'll specify that being as point to point. Okay, so let's check if this works, and let's do a do show. Okay, OSPF protocols. IPv6 OSPF. Okay, so yeah, this gives us some details about what our devices is configured with. Also, if we want to check that if our OSPF is correctly configured on the different areas that we have specified, so I'll just do a do show IPv6 protocols. I was actually writing OSPF, but it's IPv6, and now we can see that loopback 0 is under our area 1. So earlier this wasn't enabled, so we used IPv6 enable for that case, and then we tried configuring OSPF on it. So now having said that and having our interfaces all configured in the correct area, moving on to the next step. The next step is simply doing a show IPv6 OSPF. This will give an idea about the details, the summary information about IPv6 used and the area related information. Okay, how things are moving around in this network. So we can do it on R2 as well. So IPv6 OSPF and also on R3. So show IPv6 OSPF. Now let's verify our neighbors. Sorry. So let's verify our neighbors here. So in OSPFv3, we are going to specify in R1 as show IPv6 OSPF neighbor. So we can see that our neighbor of R1 directly shows the neighbor ID that we had configured. So neighbor ID here in this case is R2. Okay, and it shows the interface that it is connected with. Next, we're going to see what's in R2 here. So we are going to run show IPv6 OSPF neighbor, and we can see that we have router 3 and router 1 as our neighbor here, which is correct. So we are getting our expected results. Next, show IPv6 OSPF neighbor. Oh, oops. And we can see router ID 22 here showing us the IPv6 neighbor. Now in the next step, we'll just try another command, that is show IPv6 route OSPF. Now this will show us all the OSPF configurations that we have done. Okay, same we are going to do it on R2. Show IPv6 route OSPF, and even on R3. Now in OSPF we have something called as the IPv6 OSPF database. In order to see the OSPF database, we are going to issue the command that is show IPv6 OSPF database. That I'm going to run in R1. So I'm going to do a show IPv6 OSPF database, and it shows us some information about that router's link state along with its area and how it is linked with the different states and the amount of link count as well as sequences that is associated with that router. So you can see there are more details given ahead here showing us the complete OSPF database. Now we can do the same on R2 and check if we can see any information there. OSPF database. We see the same here. Okay, giving details about its neighboring routers. And R3 here we are going to also run even it R3, so it will be show IPv6 OSPF database. Okay, so that's all for this implementation. We have seen an example of multi-area OSPF where we configured multi-area with loopbacks as well as 3 different routers. So all these 3 routers with their interfaces connected in area 0, and the 2 sets of loopbacks that we created were in 2 different areas, area 1 and area 2.